My brother Donovan laughed when he saw me in my marine dress blues. Not a chuckle, not a smirk, a full-throated laugh that echoed through our childhood home like I'd just told him the world's funniest joke. "Really, Reese? You're still playing soldier?" he said, straightening his Harvard Medical School tie while our parents nodded approvingly from the living room couch. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 6 hours, I'd walk into the Pendleton Officers Club where 300 Marines would leap to their feet and thunder, "Commander on deck!" so loud the windows would shake. But let me tell you how a small-town girl from Millbrook Valley became the person her own family refused to see. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I've been invisible in the Cavendish household since I could walk. Not because I couldn't achieve things, but because Donovan achieved them first, louder, and with more fanfare. He was the golden son who spoke in complete sentences at 18 months, read chapter books in kindergarten, and won every academic competition Millbrook Elementary could throw at him. I was the kid who collected rocks, asked too many questions about how things worked, and got grass stains on every piece of clothing I owned. By middle school, the pattern was set in stone. Donovan would bring home perfect report cards, science fair blue ribbons, and acceptance letters to summer programs at prestigious universities. I'd bring home B+ grades, a bloody nose from defending some kid getting bullied, and detention slips for disruptive behavior, which really meant I corrected a teacher who got historical facts wrong about World War II battles. Our parents, Dr. Margaret Cavendish and Professor Edmund Cavendish, both respected academics in our little college town, knew exactly how to celebrate Donovan's wins. They'd frame his certificates, call the grandparents, post about his achievements on their faculty social media accounts. When I made varsity soccer as a freshman, or when I organized a school-wide fundraiser that raised $3,000 for local veterans, the answer was always the same polite smile and a, "That's nice, dear," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Donovan's latest triumph. It wasn't malicious neglect, it was worse. It was the kind of benign oversight that happens when one child fits perfectly into your worldview and the other one doesn't even register on your radar. The military wasn't even on my radar until I was 16. I was walking through downtown Millbrook after another family dinner where Donovan had announced his early acceptance to Harvard, and I'd sat there picking at my food while everyone discussed his brilliant future. That's when I saw her, Staff Sergeant Rivera, a Marine in her dress blues, talking to a group of high school kids outside the post office. She wasn't the biggest person in the crowd, wasn't the loudest, but when she spoke, everyone listened. There was something about the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence, the sense that she'd been tested and proven herself in ways that mattered. I hung back until the crowd dispersed, then approached her. "What's it really like?" I asked. She looked me up and down, this scrawny 16-year-old with mud on her shoes and determination in her eyes. "Depends," she said. "You looking for adventure, or are you looking to prove something to yourself?" I thought about it. "Both," I said honestly. She smiled. "Then you might just have what it takes." That night, I went home and researched everything I could about the Marines. Not the Hollywood version, not the recruitment video version, but the real thing. The history, the values, the crucible that turned ordinary people into something extraordinary. I read about women like General Lori Reynolds, who'd broken barriers and commanded respect in a male-dominated field. I read about the battles of Iwo Jima and Fallujah, about Marines who'd held impossible lines and brought their people home against impossible odds. I didn't tell my family about my plans. Not yet. Instead, I started preparing myself. I ran every morning before school, did push-ups until my arms shook, studied military history with the same intensity Donovan applied to his pre-med courses. I joined JROTC at school, where Colonel Washington, a Vietnam veteran, saw something in me that my own family had missed. "You've got the mind of a strategist, Cavendish," he told me after I had planned a mock mission that impressed even the senior cadets. "Most importantly, you've got the heart of a leader." When I finally told my parents about my intention to enlist after graduation, the reaction was exactly what I had expected. Mom immediately started talking about college applications and keeping my options open. Dad launched into a lecture about wasting my potential and following in Donovan's footsteps towards a meaningful career in academia or medicine. Donovan just laughed, that same laugh I'd hear years later when he saw me in dress blues. "Reese wants to play G.I. Jane," he announced to anyone who'd listen. But I wasn't playing. While Donovan was memorizing anatomy textbooks and networking at pre-med socials, I was learning to navigate with a compass, studying tactical formations and developing the kind of mental toughness that would serve me well in the years to come. I shipped out to Parlis Island 3 weeks after graduation, leaving behind a family who thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life. What they didn't understand, what Donovan still doesn't understand, is that some people aren't built to follow conventional paths. Some people need to be tested by fire, need to earn their place through blood, sweat, and the kind of challenges that strip away everything non-essential and reveal who you really are. That skinny girl from Millbrook Valley who collected rocks and asked too many questions about how things worked, she was just waiting for the right environment to show what she was really made of. And as I stood in our childhood living room years later, watching my brother laugh at my uniform while our parents exchanged those familiar looks of polite disappointment, I realized something profound. They still saw me as that grass-stained kid who didn't fit their academic mold. They had no idea that the woman standing before them had commanded troops in 3 different combat zones, had earned the respect of warriors who measured worth in courage rather than diplomas, and was about to receive an honor that would change everything. But they were about to find out. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning I left for Parris Island, Donovan was already gone, off to some pre-med summer intensive at Johns Hopkins where he'd network with future colleagues and add another line to his already impressive resume. Mom had made his favorite blueberry pancakes before he left, took photos of him with his luggage, and posted them on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our future doctor." When my Marine recruiter, Sergeant Torres, arrived at 0500 to drive me to the airport, my parents were still in their pajamas, offering polite but distant goodbyes like I was heading off to summer camp instead of the most challenging 13 weeks of my life. "You sure about this, Reese?" Dad asked one final time, adjusting his reading glasses and looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "It's not too late to defer a year, apply to State University like we discussed. Donovan could help you with your application essays when he gets back from Baltimore." That was the moment. Standing in our driveway at dawn, duffel bag over my shoulder, watching my father unconsciously compare me to my brother even as I was walking out the door to forge my own path. Something crystallized in my chest. Not anger, but clarity. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to them anymore. I was doing this to find out who Reese Cavendish really was when she wasn't standing in Donovan's shadow. "I'm sure, Dad," I said, shaking his hand like the adult I was about to become. "I'll write when I can." Mom hugged me briefly, the kind of embrace you give someone who you're not entirely convinced they're making good choices, but you love them anyway. "Be safe," she whispered. "And remember, you can always come home if—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I heard the unspoken words, "if you realize this was all a mistake." Sergeant Torres said nothing during the 40-minute drive to the regional airport. She didn't need to. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes before transformation, like the held breath before a storm. At the airport, she finally spoke as I grabbed my bag from the trunk. "Cavendish," she said, using my last name the way Marines do, stripping away everything casual and comfortable. "Your family doesn't get it. That's not unusual. Most families don't understand what we do or why we do it. But here's what I want you to remember when things get hard down there. And they will get hard." She looked me straight in the eye. "You're not going to Parris Island to become someone else. You're going there to discover who you already are underneath all the noise." The flight to Charleston was my first time on an airplane. While other recruits around me looked nervous or excited, I felt something different. Purpose. For the first time in my life, I was heading towards something that was entirely mine. Not a path my parents had chosen, not something Donovan had done first, not a compromise or a consolation prize. This was my choice, my challenge, my chance to find out what I was really made of. Parris Island hit me like a physical force. The humidity, the shouting, the immediate stripping away of everything civilian and comfortable.
Drill instructor Sergeant Knox was a compact woman with eyes like laser sights who could drop a recruit with a look. During our first formation, she walked the line of terrified 18-year-olds, stopping in front of each of us, sizing us up like a mechanic evaluating broken machinery. When she reached me, she paused. "You got something to prove, recruit?" I answered honestly. "I've got something to discover." She almost smiled. Almost. "We'll see about that." The first weeks were designed to break us down completely. Everything I thought I knew about myself, every comfort zone I'd ever relied on got stripped away layer by layer. Wake up at 0400, immediate physical training until your muscles screamed, then weapons training, then combat drills, then more PT, then classes on Marine Corps history and values, then lights out, and maybe 5 hours of sleep if you were lucky. Some recruits cracked. Jessica Moreau from Portland quit after week 2, called her parents crying to come get her. Tyler Brennan from Detroit got sent home after failing the confidence course 3 times. But something strange happened to me in that crucible. I found my footing. Not immediately, not without struggle, but gradually I realized I was built for this kind of pressure. When other recruits complained about the early mornings, I was already awake, mentally preparing for the day ahead. When they struggled with the physical demands, I pushed harder, not because I was naturally stronger, but because I'd learned early in life that being underestimated meant you had to work twice as hard to prove your worth. The difference was, here, at Parris Island, that work actually mattered. Here, effort was measured in concrete results, not family politics or academic expectations. Drill instructor Knox noticed. During week 4, after I'd helped carry a struggling recruit through a particularly brutal obstacle course, she pulled me aside.
"You got leadership instincts, Cavendish," she said. "Natural ones. But instincts don't make Marines. Training makes Marines. Discipline makes Marines. You willing to put in the work to develop what you've got?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied without hesitation. "Good, because I'm about to make your life a lot harder." She wasn't lying. From that point forward, I wasn't just responsible for my own performance, I was responsible for helping my entire platoon succeed. When someone struggled with rifle maintenance, I stayed after hours to help them. When recruits couldn't grasp military protocol, I found ways to explain it that made sense. When morale dropped during the particularly grueling weeks, I learned to be the steady presence that kept everyone focused on the goal. It wasn't about being popular or well-liked. It was about understanding that true strength comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. It was about earning respect through action, not demanding it through position. It was about becoming the kind of person others could count on when everything went sideways. Meanwhile, letters from home painted a picture of life continuing exactly as expected. Donovan was excelling in his summer program, already being courted by research professors. Mom and Dad attended faculty parties and dinner parties where they talked proudly about their son's promising medical career. My absence was noted mainly in terms of logistics. One less person to cook for, one less schedule to coordinate around. But I wasn't hurt by their oversight anymore. I was too busy becoming someone new. Someone stronger, more confident, more capable than the girl who'd left Millbrook Valley 3 months earlier. Someone who was learning that the opinions of people who'd never tested themselves under real pressure mattered a lot less than I'd once believed. The night before graduation, I wrote a letter home. Not the chatty, reassuring letter they probably expected, but something honest and direct. "I know you don't understand why I chose this path. I know you wish I'd followed Donovan to college, pursued something more conventional and safe. But I need you to know that I've found exactly where I belong. I've found my calling, and I'm just getting started." I sealed the letter and handed it to the mail clerk, knowing it would reach Millbrook Valley long before I did. When I finally came home on leave, I wouldn't be the same person who'd left Millbrook Valley. I'd be a Marine, and everything would be different. But first, I had to earn the title, and that was exactly what I intended to do. Graduation day at Parris Island changed everything. Not because of the ceremony itself, though watching my platoon transform from a ragged collection of civilians into disciplined Marines was something I'll never forget, but because of what happened afterward. While most new Marines headed home for leave or to their first duty station,
I was pulled aside by Captain Rodriguez, a compact woman with steel gray eyes and 3 rows of ribbons on her chest. "Cavendish," she said, reviewing my file with the kind of attention that made me stand straighter. "Your instructors say you've got leadership potential. More than potential, they say you've got the instinct for it. Problem is, instinct without education is just gut feeling. You interested in proving you've got more than gut feelings?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because I'm about to make your life a lot harder." "You interested in proving you've got more than gut feelings?" "Good. Because I'm about to make your life a lot harder." "You interested in proving you've got more than gut feelings?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because I'm about to make your life a lot harder." "You interested in proving you've got more than gut feelings?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because I'm about to make your life a lot harder." "You interested in proving you've got more than gut feelings?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because I'm about to make your life a lot harder." "You interested in proving you've got more than gut feelings?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because I'm about to make your life a lot harder. I'm recommending you for accelerated promotion track and officer candidate school consideration. But first, you're going to Camp Lejeune for advanced infantry training, then specialized schools. You'll be working with units that most Marines don't see until they've got 5 years under their belt. You think you can handle that kind of pressure? I thought about my family back in Millbrook Valley, probably planning Donovan's welcome home celebration from his summer program, already talking about his sophomore year at Harvard and his bright medical future. They had no idea their supposedly wayward daughter had just been selected for a path that less than 5% of Marines ever walked. "I can handle it, ma'am." Camp Lejeune was where I learned the difference between being a Marine and being a warrior. The advanced infantry training pushed us beyond basic combat skills into complex tactical operations, urban warfare, and leadership under fire. But more importantly, it's where I met the people who would shape the next phase of my career. Gunnery Sergeant Williams was a legend, a 20-year veteran who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, earned a Bronze Star, and had a reputation for turning raw Marines into elite operators. He was also notorious for having zero patience for anyone who couldn't keep up with his standards. On our first day, he stood in front of our class of 40 Marines and delivered a speech I'll never forget. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from leading people through actual combat. "You're here because someone thinks you might have what it takes to lead Marines in the worst possible circumstances. Keyword, might. Half of you will wash out in the next 8 weeks. The other half will either become the kind of leaders Marines trust their lives with, or you'll become cautionary tales about why potential doesn't mean shit without execution." His eyes found mine in the group. This isn't basic training anymore. This isn't about following orders and staying in line. This is about making decisions when there are no good options, keeping your people alive when everything's gone wrong, and taking responsibility for outcomes you can't control. You think you're ready for that? "Yes, Gunny," we shouted in unison. "We'll see." The training was unlike anything I'd experienced. We ran live fire exercises in simulated urban environments, practiced close-quarters combat in buildings rigged with smoke and strobing lights, and learned to coordinate air support, artillery, and ground units in complex scenarios designed to test our decision-making under extreme stress.
But the real education came from working alongside Marines who'd already proven themselves in combat. Staff Sergeant Thompson had been a squad leader in Fallujah. Corporal Martinez had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a forward observer. These weren't textbook warriors, they were the real thing, and they shared their knowledge with an intensity that made clear how much lives depended on getting these lessons right. It was Staff Sergeant Thompson who first noticed something special about my approach to leadership. During a particularly complex urban assault exercise, our unit got pinned down by simulated enemy fire in a mock Iraqi village. The exercise was designed to test how we handled unexpected setbacks and leadership transitions. When our assigned team leader got killed by an instructor playing enemy sniper, chaos threatened to take over. Without thinking, I took charge. Not by shouting orders or trying to dominate the situation, but by quickly assessing our tactical position, identifying our best options, and clearly communicating a plan that got us out of the kill zone and back on mission. The whole evolution took maybe 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes caught the attention of every instructor watching. Afterward, Thompson pulled me aside. "Where'd you learn to read terrain like that, Cavendish?" "I don't know, Staff Sergeant. It just made sense." He studied my face for a moment. "You know what makes sense to most people when bullets start flying, even simulated ones? Panic, fear, following whoever's shouting loudest. But you went quiet, assessed the situation, and found the solution. That's not something we can teach. That's something you either have or you don't." That conversation changed my trajectory. Word got around about the new Marine who could think clearly under pressure, who could read tactical situations like some people read books. Soon, I was being selected for the most challenging exercises, assigned to work with the most experienced instructors, and given responsibilities that typically went to Marines with years more experience. The irony wasn't lost on me. Back home, I'd been the family member who couldn't quite measure up, whose achievements were always overshadowed by Donovan's academic success. Here, surrounded by some of the most capable people I'd ever met, I was standing out for all the right reasons. During our final exercise, a 3-day field operation that simulated everything from humanitarian relief to combat operations, I was selected as platoon leader for the second day, after our original leader was injured by instructors. It was a test within a test, designed to see how younger Marines handled unexpected leadership responsibilities. The scenario was complex. We had to secure a village, coordinate with local forces, played by instructors, establish a medical aid station, and conduct security patrols, all while dealing with simulated enemy attacks and civilian casualties. Most importantly, we had to do it all while maintaining the safety and morale of 40 Marines who were already exhausted from 2 days of nonstop operations. I didn't try to be the loudest voice or the most commanding presence. Instead, I focused on what had worked for me since basic training, listening to my people, understanding their capabilities, and putting them in positions where they could succeed. I delegated responsibilities to Marines who had specific expertise, made sure everyone understood not just what we were doing, but why we were doing it, and stayed calm when unexpected challenges arose. When instructors, launched a coordinated attack on our aid station, I coordinated our response while simultaneously calling in medical evacuation for our wounded and ensuring civilian evacuees stayed safe. When our communications went down, I adapted our patrol routes and checkpoint procedures to maintain security without losing situational awareness. At the end of the 3 days, Gunnery Sergeant Williams gathered our entire class for debriefing. As he reviewed each day's performance, he spent extra time on the second day's operations. Day 2 was textbook, he said, looking directly at me. Smooth coordination, effective communication, 0 casualties, mission accomplished ahead of schedule. More importantly, every Marine under that leadership came out confident and ready for the next challenge. That's what good leadership looks like. After the official debrief, Captain Rodriguez approached me again. "Cavendish, I've been watching your performance for 8 weeks now. Your instructors tell me you've got something special. More than that, you've got the judgment to use it responsibly. I'm fast-tracking your officer candidate school application. If you're interested, you could be at Quantico in 6 months." Officer candidate school, the path to becoming a Marine officer, to leading not just squads, but entire companies of Marines. It was an opportunity that most Marines spent years working towards, and I was being offered it after less than a year in the Corps. "What about my family, ma'am? They still think I'm just playing soldier." Captain Rodriguez smiled, the first time I'd ever seen her expression soften. "Cavendish, your family's going to have to catch up to who you're becoming. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to the Marines who'll be counting on you to lead them. You're ready for that responsibility?" I thought about Donovan, probably studying for his organic chemistry midterms, worried about his GPA and medical school applications. I thought about my parents, proud of their conventional success story, still waiting for me to come to my senses and follow a more traditional path.
Then I thought about the Marines I'd just spent 3 days leading, who trusted me with their safety and their mission. I thought about Staff Sergeant Thompson and Gunnery Sergeant Williams and all the experienced warriors who'd taken the time to teach me their craft. Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. What I didn't know then was that ready was just the beginning. Officer Candidate School would test everything I thought I knew about leadership, about myself, and about what it meant to earn the trust of people whose lives depended on your decisions.
But I also didn't know that 6 months later, I'd be standing in front of another formation, receiving another honor that would put me on a path my family could never have imagined. A path that would eventually lead to that moment in the Pendleton Officers Club, when 300 Marines would rise to their feet in recognition of what I'd become. First, though, I had to prove I could handle the pressure of leading Marines who were older, more experienced, and more skilled than the 20-year-old from Millbrook Valley who still sometimes missed her family, even when they couldn't see past their own expectations to understand what she was accomplishing. The letter arrived at my parents' house on a Tuesday morning while I was at Quantico, 3 weeks into Officer Candidate School. Mom called me that evening during our brief personal time, her voice carrying that familiar tone of polite confusion that had become her default whenever my military career came up. "Reese, honey, we got some official-looking mail for you today," she said, and I could hear Dad rustling papers in the background. Something from Marine Corps headquarters about commendations and, well, we're not really sure what it all means. I knew exactly what it meant. The letter contained notification that I'd been awarded the Marine Corps Achievement Medal for my performance during the Advanced Infantry Training Exercises at Lejeune. It was significant recognition, the kind of early career award that marked someone as having exceptional potential. More importantly, it came with a formal recommendation for expedited officer training and a note from Gunnery Sergeant Williams himself highlighting my exceptional tactical acumen and natural leadership abilities under pressure. "It's a medal, Mom, for exemplary performance during training." "Oh, that's nice, dear." The pause stretched long enough that I could practically hear her trying to figure out how to respond to something outside her frame of reference. "Your father wants to know if this means you'll be coming home soon. Donovan's doing so well at Harvard. He just got selected for some prestigious research program with a professor who's won awards. We were hoping you might consider transferring to State University when you're done with whatever this is." Whatever this is. After a year of the most challenging training the military had to offer, after being selected for programs that less than 5% of Marines ever see, after earning recognition from combat veterans who'd fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, my achievements were still whatever this is to my own family. "I'm not coming home, Mom. I'm exactly where I need to be." "Well, we just worry that you're missing out on normal opportunities. Donovan says Harvard has excellent programs for veterans if you decide to go back to school later. He could help you with applications." There it was again. Donovan's name dropped into every conversation about my future, as if his path was the only legitimate measure of success. Even when I was earning recognition in one of the most respected institutions in the country, the conversation inevitably circled back to what my brother thought I should do instead. I ended the call politely and returned to studying tactical manuals, but the conversation stayed with me. Not because it hurt, I'd moved past needing their validation, but because it highlighted just how completely they misunderstood what I was building. 2 weeks later, during Officer Candidate School's most grueling phase, I received news that would have been front-page material in any military family. I'd been selected as honor graduate candidate for my OCS class. Out of 200 candidates, I was in the running for the highest honor the school could bestow, recognition as the single most outstanding future officer in the entire program. The selection came after a particularly challenging week that tested everything from our physical conditioning to our ability to lead under extreme stress. The culminating exercise was called Pandemonium,
a 72-hour field operation where candidates rotated through leadership positions while dealing with constantly changing scenarios, equipment failures, simulated casualties, and psychological pressure designed to break down anyone who couldn't handle the stress of real combat leadership. Major Patterson, the OCS commanding officer and a decorated veteran of 3 combat deployments, pulled me aside after the exercise. Cavendish, in 20 years of training officers, I've rarely seen anyone handle complex crisis management with that level of composure. You didn't just manage the situation, you owned it. Your unit would follow you anywhere, and that's not something you can teach. The honor graduate selection meant I'd graduate first in my class, receive recognition at the commissioning ceremony, and be offered first choice of military occupational specialties and duty assignments. It was the kind of achievement that launched careers, the sort of recognition that marked someone as destined for significant leadership roles in the Corps. I called home that night to share the news, thinking that maybe this accomplishment would be significant enough to penetrate their academic tunnel vision. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Honor graduate. That sounds very impressive. Your father's in his study grading papers, but I'll let him know." In the background, I could hear the TV playing what sounded like a news program. Mom continued, "Oh, you'll never guess what happened today. The local paper did a feature article about Donovan. They called him a rising star in medical research and mentioned his summer program at Johns Hopkins. We bought 10 copies. I've been showing it to everyone." My stomach tightened, not with jealousy, but with the familiar, hollow feeling of being overlooked. Here I was, about to graduate first in one of the military's most competitive programs, having earned recognition from combat veterans who'd led Marines in actual war zones, and the conversation had already shifted to Donovan's newspaper feature. "Mom, did you hear what I said about honor graduate?" "Of course, honey, we're very proud. It's just, well, we don't really understand all the military terminology." But Donovan's article was so easy to understand. They explained all about his research and his future plans. The journalist said he's going to change how doctors treat certain diseases. That night, I sat in my barracks room looking at the official notification of my honor graduate selection. The letter was signed by the commanding general of Marine Corps Training Command and included language about exceptional leadership potential and recommended for accelerated career advancement. It represented the culmination of 18 months of the most challenging training the military could offer, recognition that I was among the very best of my generation of Marine officers. But my family would never really understand what it meant. To them, it was just another military thing that didn't translate into their academic world of research papers and medical school rankings. They weren't being malicious. They simply couldn't see past their own frame of reference to recognize excellence in a field they didn't value or understand. 3 days before graduation, I received a package from home. Inside was a care package of cookies, a letter from Mom with local news and updates about Donovan's latest achievements, and a newspaper clipping of his feature article. At the bottom of the letter, almost as an afterthought, Mom had written, "We hope your graduation goes well. Sorry we can't be there. It's during your father's final exam period, and Donovan has important presentations." The commissioning ceremony would be attended by generals, decorated veterans, and families proud to watch their children become Marine officers. My parents would be absent, not because they disapproved, but because they couldn't prioritize something they didn't understand over their familiar academic calendar. I folded the letter and placed it in my footlocker next to my other personal items. The absence of family support no longer stung the way it once had. I'd learned to find validation in the respect of people who understood what I was accomplishing. My instructors, my fellow candidates, and the Marines I had already begun to lead. But what my family didn't realize was that their continued blindness to my achievements was creating something they couldn't have anticipated. Every overlooked accomplishment, every redirected conversation, every moment when my successes were measured against Donovan's completely different path was forging me into someone stronger, more self-reliant, and more determined than I might have become with their support. The woman who would graduate honor graduate from officer candidate school wasn't seeking their approval anymore. She was building something they couldn't see, earning recognition they couldn't understand, and preparing for responsibilities they couldn't imagine. Soon, very soon, that woman would have opportunities to demonstrate just how far she'd come from the grass-stained kid they'd never quite known how to celebrate. And when that moment came, their continued blindness would make the revelation all the more dramatic. The honor graduate ceremony was just the beginning. The real test and the real recognition was still ahead. The phone call came at 06:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, 2 months after I'd been commissioned as a second lieutenant and stationed at Camp Pendleton with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. I was reviewing training schedules for my infantry platoon when my company commander, Captain Hayes, appeared in my office doorway with an expression I couldn't read. "Cavendish, you need to report to Colonel Morrison's office immediately. Full dress uniform." Colonel Morrison was the regimental commander, 3 levels above me in the chain of command, and not someone a new lieutenant typically met unless something had gone very wrong or very right. I'd never spoken to him directly, though I'd heard he was a decorated veteran of multiple combat deployments and had a reputation for identifying and developing exceptional officers. 20 minutes later, I stood at attention outside his office, my mind racing through every decision I'd made since taking command of my platoon. Had I missed something, made an error in judgment, failed to meet some standard I wasn't aware of? "Enter," came the colonel's voice from inside. Colonel Morrison's office was sparse and functional. Military maps on the walls, commendation photos with various dignitaries, and a simple desk covered with operational reports. Behind the desk sat a man in his late 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years in the field. Next to him stood a woman I didn't know, a lieutenant colonel with the bearing that suggested special operations background. "Lieutenant Cavendish reporting as ordered, sir." "At ease, Lieutenant. Have a seat." Colonel Morrison gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Do you know why you're here?" "No, sir." "You're here because your name keeps appearing in conversations it shouldn't. In 18 months of service, you've earned recognition at every level of training, graduated honor graduate from officer candidate school, and your current platoon has achieved the highest readiness ratings in the battalion. That's impressive, but not unprecedented." He paused, studying a file that I assumed contained my service record. "What is unprecedented is this." He slid a document across the desk. 3 separate recommendations for special operations assessment, submitted by officers who've never met each other, but have all observed your performance. Major Patterson from Quantico, Gunnery Sergeant Williams from Lejeune, and now Captain Hayes. They all say the same thing. You have capabilities that are being wasted in conventional assignments.
My heart rate quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. Special operations. That meant Force Reconnaissance, the Marine Corps' elite special operations units that conducted deep reconnaissance, direct action missions, and operated in small teams behind enemy lines. It was the pinnacle of Marine combat operations, reserved for the most capable and mentally tough Marines in the Corps. Lieutenant Colonel Santos here, he nodded toward the woman beside him, commands the Force Recon training pipeline. She's here to evaluate whether you're ready for assessment or whether you need more seasoning first. Lieutenant Colonel Santos stepped forward, her eyes analyzing me with the intensity of someone who'd spent years evaluating potential special operators. "Ma'am, I don't know if I'm ready, but I know that every challenge I've faced, from basic training to OCS to leading Marines in training, has taught me that I perform better under pressure, not worse. I think clearly when situations get complex, and I've learned to trust my instincts while still considering input from my team. If I'm not ready now, I believe the assessment process will either prepare me or identify what I need to work on." Lieutenant Colonel Santos exchanged a look with Colonel Morrison. "Fair answer, but assessment isn't just about your capabilities, Lieutenant. It's about your commitment.
If you're selected, you'll spend the next year in the most demanding training the military offers. You'll learn languages, advanced tactics, specialized weapon systems, and survival skills that push human endurance to its limits. Some of the best Marines I've known have quit during training. What makes you think you won't? I thought carefully before answering. This wasn't about bravado or proving how tough I was. This was about demonstrating the kind of judgment that special operations demanded. Ma'am, I don't know if I'm ready, but I know that every challenge I faced, from basic training to OCS to leading Marines in training, has taught me that I perform better under pressure, not worse. I think clearly when situations get complex, and I've learned to trust my instincts while still considering input from my team. If I'm not ready now, I believe the assessment process will either prepare me or identify what I need to work on. Lieutenant Colonel Santos exchanged a look with Colonel Morrison. Fair answer, but assessment isn't just about your capabilities, Lieutenant. It's about your commitment. If you're selected, you'll spend the next year in the most demanding training the military offers. You'll learn languages, advanced tactics, specialized weapon systems, and survival skills that push human endurance to its limits. Some of the best Marines I've known have quit during training. What makes you think you won't? I thought about my family back in Millbrook Valley, probably discussing Donovan's academic achievements over dinner while having no idea that their daughter was being considered for the most elite units in the military. I thought about all the times I'd been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, and how each of those experiences had only made me more determined to prove myself through actions rather than words. Ma'am, I don't know if I'm ready, but I know that every challenge I faced, from basic training to OCS to leading Marines in training, has taught me that I perform better under pressure, not worse. I think clearly when situations get complex, and I've learned to trust my instincts while still considering input from my team. Ma'am, I've never quit anything that mattered, and this matters. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Lieutenant Colonel Santos smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. Colonel Morrison, I think we have our answer. She turned back to me. Lieutenant Cavendish, if you accept, you'll report to Camp Pendleton's Special Operations Training Group in 6 weeks. The assessment phase lasts 4 months. If you pass assessment, you'll proceed to the full training pipeline, which takes an additional 8 months. The washout rate is 70%, and that includes Marines with years more experience than you have. The other thing you need to understand is that this path changes everything. If you succeed, you'll be operating at a level most Marines never see. Your missions will be classified, your achievements will often go unrecognized publicly, and your family may never fully understand what you do or why it matters. You'll be serving in a world that operates in shadows, where success is measured in missions completed rather than medals displayed. That last part almost made me laugh. My family already didn't understand what I did or why it mattered. The idea of operating in shadows, of being successful without public recognition, wasn't a sacrifice. It was exactly what I'd been doing my entire career. I accept, sir. Outstanding. Colonel Morrison stood and extended his hand. Lieutenant, you're about to embark on the most challenging training the military offers, but based on everything I've seen in your file and heard from your recommending officers, I believe you have the potential to excel at this level. Don't prove me wrong. As I walked back to my company area, my mind was spinning with the implications of what had just happened. Force reconnaissance, the elite of the elite, Marines who operated in small teams conducting missions that regular units couldn't handle. It was an opportunity that most Marines would give anything for, and I'd been hand-selected based on performance that my own family still couldn't quite understand or appreciate. That evening, I called home to share the news, knowing it would probably generate the same polite confusion as my previous achievements, but feeling obligated to try. That sounds very exciting, dear, Mom said after I'd explained about the special operations selection, though we don't really understand what all that means. Is it dangerous? All military service involves some risk, Mom, but it's also an incredible honor to be selected. Well, just be careful. Oh, speaking of honors, Donovan just found out he's been accepted into a very prestigious medical research program for next summer. The professor who selected him called him one of the most promising young researchers he'd ever worked with. Isn't that wonderful? There it was again. Within 30 seconds of sharing news about being selected for the most elite training in the military, the conversation had shifted to Donovan's academic achievements. But this time, instead of feeling frustrated or overlooked, I felt something different. Clarity. I was about to enter a world where actions spoke louder than words, where capability mattered more than credentials, and where the respect of your peers was earned through performance under pressure rather than grades on transcripts. It was a world my family might never understand, but it was exactly where I belonged.
6 weeks later, I reported to the Special Operations Training Group compound at Camp Pendleton. The facility was unlike any military installation I'd seen. Everything was purpose-built for training Marines to operate in extreme conditions. The buildings were modern but austere. The training areas were designed to simulate every possible combat environment, and the atmosphere was charged with an intensity that made clear this was serious business. My first day, I joined 37 other Marines for initial briefings. Looking around the room, I saw staff sergeants with combat deployments, corporals with specialized skills, and experienced Marines who'd spent years preparing for this opportunity. Then there was me, a 22-year-old lieutenant with 18 months of service and a track record that suggested I might have what it took. The training cadre entered the room, led by Master Sergeant Kowalski, a broad-shouldered man with scars on his hands and the kind of presence that suggested he'd seen everything the military could throw at someone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying absolute authority, "welcome to Force Reconnaissance Assessment. Over the next 4 months, we're going to test every aspect of your capabilities, physical, mental, and psychological. We're going to push you past every limit you think you have, then see what you do when there's nothing left except your will to continue." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across each of us. "By Christmas, most of you will be gone. Those who remain will have earned the right to call themselves Force Reconnaissance Marines. The question isn't whether you think you belong here. The question is whether you're willing to prove it." As I sat in that room, surrounded by some of the most capable Marines in the Corps, I realized this was the moment I'd been preparing for my entire career. Everything, from basic training to OCS to the leadership challenges I'd faced, had been building toward this opportunity to test myself against the highest standards the military could set. The final exercise came on week 16 of Force Reconnaissance Assessment, after 4 months of the most punishing training I had ever experienced. Of the 38 Marines who'd started the program, only 12 remained. The others had been eliminated through injury, inability to meet standards, or simple recognition that they weren't cut out for this level of operations. Those of us still standing had been tested in every conceivable way: underwater demolitions, long-range reconnaissance, close-quarters combat, survival training, and psychological evaluations that probed every weakness and insecurity we possessed. But the culminating exercise, codenamed Phantom Strike, was designed to test everything simultaneously. It was a 72-hour mission that combined all the skills we'd learned into one seamless operation that would determine who among us would earn the coveted Force Recon designation. The scenario was complex but realistic. A 6-man team would infiltrate hostile territory, locate and rescue a downed pilot, gather intelligence on enemy positions, and extract without detection. The hostile territory was a 30-square-mile section of Camp Pendleton's remote training areas, patrolled by Marine instructors playing enemy forces who knew the terrain intimately and had orders to capture or eliminate any reconnaissance teams they encountered.
What made the exercise particularly challenging was that it wasn't just about individual performance, it was about team leadership under extreme pressure. Each of the 12 remaining candidates would rotate through the team leader position during different phases of the mission, and our performance would be evaluated not just on our own actions, but on how effectively we could coordinate and lead a team of elite Marines under combat conditions. I drew the second leadership rotation, which meant I'd be taking command during the infiltration phase, arguably the most critical part of the mission. If we were detected during infiltration, the entire operation would fail before we even reached our primary objectives. Master Sergeant Kowalski briefed us at 0400 on a Monday morning, his face illuminated by red light in the briefing tent to preserve our night vision. "Your insertion point is here," he indicated on the map, approximately 8 kilometers from the target area. Intelligence suggests enemy patrols follow predictable patterns, but you should assume they've been modified since your briefing. Weather forecast calls for intermittent fog and light rain. That's good for concealment, but bad for visibility and navigation. He looked at each of us in turn. "The downed pilot is being held in a fortified position here. Your window for extraction is narrow. Too early and you won't have gathered the required intelligence. Too late and enemy reinforcements will make rescue impossible." Questions? There were none. After 16 weeks of training, we'd learned to absorb complex briefings and fill in details through reconnaissance and adaptation. The real test wasn't whether we understood the mission parameters, it was whether we could execute them flawlessly when everything went wrong, as it inevitably would. At 0530 hours, our team inserted via helicopter at the designated landing zone. The first team leader, Staff Sergeant Chen, successfully got us from the insertion point to within 2 kilometers of the target area, navigating through challenging terrain while avoiding 2 enemy patrol routes that had been modified since our briefing. At 1200 hours, I assumed command for the infiltration phase. This was the moment everything I'd learned over the past 16 weeks would be tested in real time. Our mission was to move our 6-man team through heavily patrolled enemy territory, establish an observation post overlooking the target compound, and begin the intelligence gathering phase without being detected. The terrain was unforgiving. Dense brush interspersed with open areas that offered no concealment, rocky outcroppings that could hide enemy observers, and a creek system that provided cover but also channeled movement into predictable patterns. Weather conditions had deteriorated since insertion, with thick fog that limited visibility to less than 50 meters and made navigation significantly more challenging.
I studied the terrain through my scope, mentally mapping the safest route while accounting for known enemy positions and likely patrol routes. The direct approach would save time, but expose us to observation from multiple elevated positions. The longer route would take us through more concealed terrain, but increase our exposure time and risk of encountering patrols. "Ramirez," I whispered to our point man, "we're taking the ridgeline approach. It's longer, but it keeps us below the skyline and gives us multiple escape routes if we're compromised." "Roger that, Lieutenant. What's our spacing?" 15-meter intervals, hand and arm signals only. "Chen, you've got rear security. If anyone makes contact, we bound backward to Rally Point Alpha and reassess." What followed was 3 hours of the most intense movement I'd ever experienced. Every step had to be calculated, not just for noise discipline, but for maintaining team integrity in limited visibility while avoiding areas where enemy forces might be positioned. I found myself constantly balancing speed with stealth, mission requirements with team safety, and planned routes with real-time adaptations based on changing conditions. Twice, we had to alter course when patrol sounds indicated enemy forces were closer than anticipated. Once we spent 45 minutes in a hide position while an enemy observation team set up less than 100 meters from our location. During that time, I had to make continuous silent hand signals to keep the team positioned and alert while remaining completely motionless myself. The most critical moment came when we reached the final approach to our observation post. The target compound was visible below us, but the designated position had been compromised. Fresh fighting positions indicated enemy forces had established security on the high ground we'd planned to occupy. I had 30 seconds to make a decision that would determine the success or failure of the entire mission. Use the compromised position and risk immediate detection, or find an alternative that might not provide adequate intelligence coverage but would keep the team safe. Through my scope, I identified a secondary position that would give us partial coverage of the target area while remaining concealed from the enemy security positions. It wasn't ideal, but it was workable, and it preserved the team's ability to continue the mission. I used hand signals to redirect the team to the alternative position and spent the next hour coordinating our intelligence gathering to compensate for the limited visibility. By rotating team members through different observation angles and using our communications equipment to triangulate enemy positions, we were able to gather the required intelligence despite the tactical compromise. When my leadership rotation ended at 1800 hours, we had successfully infiltrated to within 400 meters of the target, established our observation post without detection, and begun the intelligence gathering phase ahead of schedule. More importantly, every member of the team was accounted for and positioned for the next phase of the operation. Master Sergeant Kowalski's voice came through my earpiece as I handed command to the next team leader. Outstanding work, Lieutenant. Textbook adaptation to changing conditions. But the real validation came from my team members. Staff Sergeant Chen, a Marine with 3 combat deployments, gave me a thumbs up as he took over rear security for the next phase. Corporal Martinez, our communications specialist, whispered, "Smooth leadership, ma'am," as he adjusted his radio equipment for the next team leader. These weren't empty compliments. They were professional assessments from Marines who'd been in combat, who understood the difference between theoretical leadership and the real thing. Their confidence in my decision-making under pressure meant more than any formal evaluation could. Over the remaining 54 hours of the exercise, our team successfully completed every mission objective. We rescued the downed pilot, gathered comprehensive intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities, and extracted without detection. But more than that, we functioned as a cohesive unit where each team leader contributed their strengths while maintaining the trust and confidence of experienced Marines who'd been testing us every step of the way. When Master Sergeant Kowalski gathered us for final debriefing after the exercise, his expression was unreadable. We'd all completed the mission, but completion wasn't the same as success in force reconnaissance standards. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "over the past 72 hours, you've demonstrated capabilities that place you among the top 1% of Marines in the Corps. You've shown that you can think clearly under pressure, lead effectively in complex situations, and maintain mission focus when everything goes wrong." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "All 12 of you have earned the right to call yourselves Force Reconnaissance Marines." The moment was surreal. After 16 weeks of the most demanding training I'd ever experienced, after proving myself alongside some of the most capable Marines in the Corps, I had achieved something that most Marines could only dream of. I was now qualified for missions that conventional units couldn't handle, operations that would remain classified long after they were completed. That night, as I packed my gear in preparation for assignment to an operational force reconnaissance unit, I thought about calling home to share the news. Then I realized there was no point. How could I explain to my family that their supposedly wayward daughter had just completed training that qualified her for the most challenging missions the military could offer? How could I describe the significance of earning respect from combat veterans and being selected for operations that would never appear in newspapers or academic journals? Instead, I focused on what came next. In 2 weeks, I'd report to 3rd Force Reconnaissance Company for assignment to an operational team. There, I'd begin the next phase of my career, conducting real missions with real consequences, leading Marines in situations where the margin for error was 0 and the stakes were measured in lives, rather than training scores.
But first, I had to go home on leave to face my family's continued bewilderment about my career choices and Donovan's latest academic achievements. What they didn't know was that the person returning to Millbrook Valley had been tested and proven at the highest levels of military service. Soon, very soon, they'd understand exactly what that meant. The homecoming dinner was everything I'd expected and worse. Mom had prepared her famous pot roast, Dad had opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving for special occasions, and Donovan had driven down from Harvard for what they'd billed as a family celebration of my completion of advanced military training. They still didn't understand what force reconnaissance meant, despite my attempts to explain it, but they were trying to show support in their own limited way. What I hadn't expected was Donovan's girlfriend, Amanda Richardson, who had apparently become a serious enough relationship to warrant inclusion in family gatherings. Amanda was exactly what I'd have predicted for my brother. Brilliant, polished, and currently pursuing her PhD in international relations at Georgetown with a focus on military policy and defense strategy. "So, Reese," Amanda said over dinner, her voice carrying the practiced interest of someone accustomed to networking conversations, "Donovan tells me you've been doing some kind of special operations training. That must be fascinating from an academic perspective. I'm actually writing my dissertation on the integration of special operations forces into broader strategic frameworks." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. In all my years of family dinners, no one had ever asked me about my military service with anything approaching genuine interest or understanding. Amanda's question caught me off guard, not because it was hostile, but because it suggested she might actually comprehend what I'd been doing. "It's comprehensive training," I said carefully. "Physical conditioning, tactical operations, specialized skills. The focus is on small unit operations in complex environments." "How small are we talking, and what kind of operational parameters?" Her follow-up questions were specific, informed, not the vague pleasantries I'd grown accustomed to from my family, but queries that demonstrated actual knowledge of military structure and capabilities. Donovan was beaming with pride, clearly delighted that his girlfriend was engaging with his sister's career in ways the family had never managed. "Amanda's research is incredible," Donovan interjected. "She's interviewed dozens of military personnel for her dissertation. Generals, field commanders, policy analysts. The Pentagon has even consulted with her on some of her findings." "Really?" I said, looking at Amanda with new interest. "What kind of findings?" "Well," Amanda leaned forward, clearly in her element, "I'm examining how special operations capabilities are integrated into national security decision-making, specifically how elite units like force reconnaissance are deployed for high-priority missions that require deniability and precision." The room went quiet. Force reconnaissance. She'd said it casually, correctly, with the kind of familiarity that suggested she knew exactly what those words meant. My parents looked confused, but Donovan was nodding as if Amanda had just referenced something they'd discussed before. "Force reconnaissance?" Dad repeated slowly. "Is that what you've been doing, Reese?" Before I could answer, Amanda continued. "It's one of the most elite designations in the military. Marines who complete that training are qualified for missions that most military personnel never even know exist. Deep reconnaissance, direct action, strategic intelligence gathering. The selection rate is something like 15%, isn't it, Reese?" "Something like that," I confirmed, still processing how thoroughly Amanda understood my career when my own family had remained clueless for 2 years. "The interesting thing," Amanda went on, "is how little public information exists about actual force reconnaissance operations. Most of their missions remain classified for decades. But from a policy perspective, they represent one of the most valuable assets in the military's toolkit for addressing threats that conventional forces can't handle." Mom and Dad were listening with the kind of attention they typically reserved for Donovan's academic presentations. For the first time in my military career, someone was explaining to my family what I'd actually accomplished, and they were beginning to understand that it might be more significant than they had realized.
Amanda's research has gotten attention from some pretty high-level people, Donovan said proudly. The State Department invited her to present her preliminary findings last month, and she's been corresponding with military advisors who work directly with special operations planning. That's impressive, I said, and I meant it, but something was nagging at me about the conversation. Amanda's knowledge was thorough, almost too thorough. Her questions about operational parameters and unit composition were more specific than most academic researchers would need for policy analysis. After dinner, as Mom and Dad cleaned up and Donovan helped in the kitchen, Amanda approached me on the back porch where I'd stepped out for some air. "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable with all the questions," she said. "It's just rare to meet someone who's actually lived the experiences I've been studying from the outside." "No, it was refreshing, actually. My family's never really understood what I do. That's common with special operations personnel. The nature of the work makes it difficult to share details, even with family." She paused, studying my face. I'd love to include some first-hand perspectives in my research. Nothing operational or classified, of course, but insights into the training process, the psychological demands, the transition from conventional forces to special operations. I'm not sure I'd be the right person for that kind of interview. Why not? You've got experience that most academics can only theorize about. And frankly, the military needs more female voices in special operations research. Most of the perspectives I've gathered have been from male personnel.
There was something in her tone that made me pause. Not pushy exactly, but persistent in a way that felt rehearsed. Like she'd had this conversation before with other special operations personnel. "How many Force Recon Marines have you interviewed for your research?" "You'd be the first, actually. Most of them are pretty closed off about discussing their experiences, even for academic purposes. But Donovan says you're different, more open to sharing your experiences." That struck me as odd. Donovan barely knew anything about my military service, let alone my personality when it came to discussing classified information. How could he have characterized me as open to sharing when we'd never had a substantial conversation about my work? "What exactly did Donovan tell you about my service?" Amanda's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Just general things. That you'd completed some advanced training, that you'd been selected for special assignments. He's very proud of you, He talks about you a lot." "He talks about me a lot?" I couldn't hide my skepticism. "Donovan and I barely discuss my career. What kind of things does he say?" "Well, he mentioned that you'd been deployed overseas, that you'd received some kind of commendation for leadership. He said you were being considered for advanced positions that most people your age never get access to." My blood began to cool. Donovan knew none of those details because I'd never shared them with him. The overseas deployment she referenced was a classified mission I'd never mentioned to anyone in my family. The commendations were documented in files that weren't public record, and the advanced positions could only refer to information that existed in personnel records accessible to very few people. "Amanda," I said carefully, "where exactly did you say you presented your research?" "The State Department, like I mentioned." "Why?" "Which department at State? Who is your point of contact?" For the first time in the conversation, Amanda hesitated. "I'm not sure I should get into those details. You understand how sensitive some of these academic relationships can be." "Right. And your dissertation advisor at Georgetown, who is that?" Another pause. "Professor Williams in the International Relations Department." I made a mental note to verify that information later. Something about this entire interaction felt choreographed, too convenient. Amanda's knowledge was too specific, her interest too targeted, and her access to information about my service record too detailed for a graduate student conducting academic research. "You know what?" I said, standing up from the porch railing. "I appreciate your interest in including military perspectives in your research, but I don't think I'm the right person to interview. Special operations personnel are generally advised to avoid academic discussions about their work." "Of course, I understand completely.
But if you change your mind, or if you think of any non-sensitive insights that might be helpful, Donovan has my contact information. As I watched Amanda return to the house, my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Her questions, her knowledge, her convenient relationship with my brother, and her obvious interest in gathering information about force reconnaissance operations, it all felt too orchestrated to be coincidental. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling and thinking about the conversation. How had Amanda known about my deployment? How had she known about specific commendations that weren't public record? And why was she so interested in interviewing Force Recon personnel for a dissertation that seemed remarkably well-informed about classified capabilities? More troubling was Donovan's role in all of this. Had he somehow accessed information about my service that he shouldn't have? Was he sharing details he'd learned through family connections? Or was there something more deliberate about Amanda's presence in our family? Over the next 2 days, I watched Amanda's interactions with my family more carefully. She asked follow-up questions about my service that were subtly probing, referenced military policies with unusual specificity, and seemed particularly interested in my upcoming assignment to an operational force recon unit. By the time I returned to base, I had reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Amanda Richardson wasn't just a graduate student with academic interest in special operations. She was someone with access to classified information about my service record, and she was using her relationship with my brother to gather intelligence about force reconnaissance capabilities and personnel. Whether Donovan was a willing participant or an unwitting accomplice, I couldn't determine. But what was clear was that my family's continued ignorance about my military career had created a vulnerability that someone was actively exploiting. The question was, what did they want, and how far were they willing to get it? The mission briefing came 3 months after I'd returned from leave and joined 3rd Force Reconnaissance Company. Our 6-man team was tasked with what appeared to be a routine intelligence gathering operation in the mountains of northern Afghanistan. Locate and assess a suspected weapons cache, document movement patterns, and extract without engagement. It was the kind of mission Force Recon teams conducted regularly. Important, but not extraordinary. What made this operation different was the tactical innovation I developed during our planning phase. Traditional reconnaissance relied on static observation posts that limited mobility and created predictable patterns. I'd proposed a dynamic approach called rolling overwatch, coordinated movement between multiple concealed positions that would allow us to gather comprehensive intelligence while maintaining the ability to reposition quickly if compromised. Master Sergeant Price, our team leader, had been skeptical initially. "Lieutenant, we've been doing reconnaissance the same way for decades, because it works. Why fix something that isn't broken?"
Because the enemy adapts, Master Sergeant. They're learning our patterns, anticipating our methods. If we don't evolve our tactics, we're going to start losing teams. After reviewing my tactical analysis and operational plan, Price had agreed to implement the rolling overwatch approach. The mission planning took weeks longer than usual as we coordinated timing, communication protocols, and contingency procedures for the more complex methodology. The operation itself was flawless. Over 5 days in hostile territory, our team successfully identified 3 separate weapons caches, documented detailed enemy patrol patterns, and gathered intelligence on command structures that conventional reconnaissance would have missed. Most importantly, we accomplished all objectives without detection, extraction on schedule with 0 casualties. The rolling overwatch technique had worked exactly as designed. By maintaining mobility and unpredictability, we'd been able to observe enemy activities from multiple angles, cross-reference intelligence, and verify information in ways that static positions couldn't achieve. The after-action report praised the mission as textbook reconnaissance and specifically highlighted the tactical innovation that had made such comprehensive intelligence gathering possible. 2 weeks after our return, I was called to Colonel Davidson's office for what I assumed would be a routine debrief and commendation. Colonel Davidson commanded all force reconnaissance operations in the region and had a reputation for personally recognizing exceptional performance.
"Lieutenant Cavendish," he began, "the intelligence your team gathered has already proven invaluable to ongoing operations. More significantly, your tactical approach has caught attention at the highest levels. The rolling Overwatch methodology is being evaluated for implementation across all reconnaissance units." "Thank you, sir. The team executed the plan perfectly." "That's what I want to discuss. This kind of tactical innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. The development and successful implementation of new methodologies represents the kind of forward thinking the Corps needs from its officers." He paused, steadying my face. "I'm recommending you for the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal and fast-tracking you for promotion consideration." The Achievement Medal was significant recognition, formal acknowledgement that my contribution had been exceptional and worthy of permanent documentation. More importantly, the recommendation would become part of my service record and factor into future assignments and advancement opportunities. "I appreciate the recognition, sir. When will the citation be processed?" "It's already in the pipeline. Should be finalized within 2 weeks." I left Colonel Davidson's office feeling a combination of pride and anticipation. Recognition for tactical innovation was exactly the kind of achievement that marked an officer as having exceptional potential. It validated not just the mission's success, but my ability to think creatively and contribute to the evolution of special operations tactics. 3 days later, Donovan called me with news that would change everything. "Reese, you'll never believe what happened. Amanda's dissertation defense was incredible. She presented this revolutionary tactical concept for special operations reconnaissance that impressed everyone on her committee. They're calling it groundbreaking research that could reshape how the military conducts intelligence gathering." My blood went cold. "What kind of tactical concept?" "Something about dynamic positioning and coordinated movement patterns for reconnaissance teams. She called it adaptive Overwatch methodology, or something like that. The professor said it was the most innovative thinking they'd seen in years." Adaptive Overwatch methodology. A slight variation on the name, but unmistakably the same tactical approach I'd developed and successfully implemented in Afghanistan just weeks earlier. Where did Amanda get this idea? She said it came from her research interviews and analysis of current reconnaissance limitations. You know how brilliant she is at synthesizing information from multiple sources. The best part is that the Pentagon is already interested in her research. She's been invited to present her findings to some kind of military strategy group. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Amanda hadn't just gathered intelligence during her visit to our family. She'd stolen my tactical innovation, repackaged it as academic research, and was now positioning herself as the originator of concepts I'd developed through actual field experience and operational testing. Has Amanda published this research yet? Her committee approved the dissertation last week, and she's already submitted it for publication in the Journal of Strategic Studies. Plus, she's got meetings scheduled with military consultants who want to discuss implementation possibilities. The timeline was devastating. Amanda's academic publication would appear months before my military commendation could be processed, creating a documented record that would make her appear to be the originator of the tactical concepts in academic and policy circles. She would be credited as the innovative thinker who developed advanced reconnaissance methodologies through scholarly research. Donovan, I need to ask you something directly. Did you share any details about my recent missions with Amanda? Of course not. You've never told me anything specific about your work. Amanda's research is based on her own interviews and analysis. What about that dinner conversation when she asked about force reconnaissance? Did you discuss any of that with her afterward? Well, sure. She was excited to learn that you were actually in force reconnaissance. She asked me to think about whether you might be willing to share some general insights for her research. Nothing classified, just professional perspectives. My worst fears were confirmed. Donovan hadn't intentionally betrayed classified information, but his enthusiasm about Amanda's research and his desire to help both of us had made him an unwitting accomplice in intelligence theft. Amanda had used her relationship with him to access information about my service, then leverage that access to steal tactical innovations that she couldn't have developed through purely academic research. Over the following weeks, I watched helplessly as Amanda's career accelerated based on my stolen work. Her dissertation was published in a prestigious journal with extensive coverage in military policy circles. Defense contractors invited her to consult on reconnaissance methodology development. Academic conferences requested her as a keynote speaker on innovative tactical thinking.
Because the enemy adapts, Master Sergeant. They're learning our patterns, anticipating our methods. If we don't evolve our tactics, we're going to start losing teams. After reviewing my tactical analysis and operational plan, Price had agreed to implement the rolling overwatch approach. The mission planning took weeks longer than usual as we coordinated timing, communication protocols, and contingency procedures for the more complex methodology. The operation itself was flawless. Over 5 days in hostile territory, our team successfully identified 3 separate weapons caches, documented detailed enemy patrol patterns, and gathered intelligence on command structures that conventional reconnaissance would have missed. Most importantly, we accomplished all objectives without detection, extraction on schedule, with 0 casualties. The rolling overwatch technique had worked exactly as designed. By maintaining mobility and unpredictability, we'd been able to observe enemy activities from multiple angles, cross-reference intelligence, and verify information in ways that static positions couldn't achieve. The after-action report praised the mission as textbook reconnaissance and specifically highlighted the tactical innovation that had made such comprehensive intelligence gathering possible. 2 weeks after our return, I was called to Colonel Davidson's office for what I assumed would be a routine debrief and commendation. Colonel Davidson commanded all force reconnaissance operations in the region and had a reputation for personally recognizing exceptional performance. "Lieutenant Cavendish," he began, "the intelligence your team gathered has already proven invaluable to ongoing operations. More significantly, your tactical approach has caught attention at the highest levels. The rolling overwatch methodology is being evaluated for implementation across all reconnaissance units." "Thank you, sir. The team executed the plan perfectly." "That's what I want to discuss. This kind of tactical innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. The development and successful implementation of new methodologies represents the kind of forward thinking the Corps needs from its officers." He paused, studying my face. "I'm recommending you for the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal and fast-tracking you for promotion consideration." The Achievement Medal was significant recognition, formal acknowledgement that my contribution had been exceptional and worthy of permanent documentation. More importantly, the recommendation would become part of my service record and factor into future assignments and advancement opportunities. "I appreciate the recognition, sir. When will the citation be processed?" "It's already in the pipeline. Should be finalized within 2 weeks."
"And what evidence do you have of this alleged theft?" Major Williams interjected, opening his own folder. Ms. Richardson's academic record shows 2 years of research into reconnaissance methodologies, including interviews with dozens of military personnel and analysis of publicly available doctrine. Her work appears to be legitimate scholarly research that reached conclusions similar to your own tactical innovations. Similar? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Major, the methodology she published is identical to what I developed, down to specific implementation details and operational terminology. That level of similarity doesn't happen through independent research." Lieutenant Colonel Martinez said firmly, "identical conclusions can result from competent analysis of the same tactical challenges. Academic researchers frequently develop theoretical solutions that parallel field innovations. Without evidence of actual disclosure of classified information, we cannot assume theft occurred." Colonel Davidson leaned forward, his expression grave. "Cavendish, I need you to understand the broader implications here. Ms. Richardson's research has gained attention from Pentagon leadership, defense contractors, and academic institutions. Her work is being evaluated for implementation across multiple services. If the Marine Corps were to challenge her academic credentials without ironclad evidence of security violations, we could face accusations of institutional sexism, academic intimidation, and suppression of legitimate research. The political calculations were becoming clear. Amanda's academic success had created a situation where challenging her would be more damaging to the military than allowing the theft to stand. Her gender, her institutional affiliations, and her growing reputation provided protection that my military rank and actual experience could not overcome. Sir, are you saying that the Marine Corps won't investigate potential theft of military intellectual property because it might be politically inconvenient? I'm saying that allegations require evidence, and evidence requires disclosure protocols that you cannot satisfy without violating classification requirements, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez replied sharply. Moreover, your personal relationship to the accused through family connections creates appearance problems that would complicate any formal investigation. Major Williams consulted his notes. Lieutenant, our review of your family's interactions with Ms. Richardson shows no evidence of you directly sharing classified information. However, your brother's enthusiasm about her research and your family's discussions of your military service created an environment where sensitive information could have been inadvertently disclosed. The implication was clear. I was being held responsible for security vulnerabilities created by my family's lack of understanding about classification protocols. My parents' innocent questions about my service, Donovan's pride in introducing his girlfriend to his military sister, and my own attempts to help my family understand my career had created opportunities for information to be compromised. Furthermore, Major Williams continued, your recent request to Colonel Davidson for recognition of your tactical innovations, coming immediately after Miss Richardson's academic success, could be interpreted as an attempt to undermine her research out of professional jealousy. Professional jealousy? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Major, I'm not trying to undermine anyone's research. I'm trying to protect military intellectual property that was developed through classified operations. Lieutenant Cavendish, Colonel Davidson's voice carried the weight of final authority. After consultation with legal services and personnel security, I'm directing you to cease any further discussion of this matter, either within military channels or in civilian contexts. Any attempt to publicly challenge Miss Richardson's research using information gained through classified operations would constitute a security violation with serious consequences for your career and potential criminal liability. The room fell silent as the implications of his directive settled. I was being ordered to remain silent about the theft of my work, forbidden from challenging Amanda's academic credentials, and warned that any attempt to seek justice would be treated as a security violation. Sir, what about my achievement medal citation that specifically mentions developing innovative reconnaissance techniques? That's official recognition of my contributions. That citation will remain in your personnel file, but it cannot be used to challenge civilian academic research without exposing classified operational details. The citation's language is deliberately general to protect operational security. So Amanda Richardson builds a career on my stolen work, and the Marine Corps' response is to silence me and protect her academic reputation? The Marine Corps' response, Colonel Davidson said firmly, is to protect classified information and avoid legal complications that could damage the institution. Your tactical innovations remain part of your service record and will be considered in future assignments and promotions. That recognition exists independently of any civilian academic research. As I left that meeting, the full scope of the system's protection became clear. Amanda hadn't just stolen my work. She'd chosen her target brilliantly. By taking tactical innovations developed during classified operations, she'd ensured that the military couldn't challenge her claims without compromising operational security. By positioning herself as an academic researcher, she'd gained institutional protections that made questioning her work appear like harassment or sexism. More insidiously, the classification system that was supposed to protect military capabilities had become a shield for intellectual theft. The very secrecy that made my innovations valuable also made them impossible to defend when someone else claimed credit for them in public forums.
Over the following weeks, I watched as additional layers of protection fell into place around Amanda's stolen success. Her research attracted positive coverage in academic journals, defense publications, and policy magazines. Military leaders who'd been briefed on her work praised her innovative thinking without knowing they were endorsing stolen tactical concepts. When I attempted to discuss the situation informally with other force reconnaissance officers, I discovered that word had spread about my allegations against a respected academic researcher. Some colleagues expressed sympathy, but made clear they couldn't support challenges to civilian research without concrete evidence of security violations. Others questioned whether my concerns reflected legitimate security issues or personal grievances that could damage the Corps' reputation.
The message was unmistakable. The system had decided that protecting Amanda Richardson's academic career was more important than addressing the theft of military intellectual property. Classification protocols, legal concerns, and political calculations had combined to create an environment where I was effectively prohibited from defending my own work or seeking justice for its theft. The most bitter irony was that the Marine Corps, an institution built on honor, integrity, and protecting your fellow Marines, had become the mechanism for silencing one of its own officers to protect a civilian who'd stolen from them. The system designed to safeguard military capabilities was being used to shield someone who'd exploited those very capabilities for personal gain. As I realized the full extent of the institutional protection surrounding Amanda's theft, I understood that conventional channels for seeking justice were not just ineffective, they'd been deliberately closed to prevent exactly the kind of challenge I was trying to mount. If I wanted to expose the truth, I'd have to find a way to do it that the system couldn't suppress or silence. The invitation came 6 months after I'd been ordered to remain silent about Amanda's theft. It was printed on expensive paper with gold lettering, the kind of formal announcement that suggested serious institutional backing. The Marine Corps Officers Association was hosting their annual Leadership Excellence Gala at the Pendleton Officers Club, featuring keynote addresses on innovation in modern military strategy and bridging academic research with operational reality. The keynote speaker was Dr. Amanda Richardson. I stared at the invitation for a long moment, processing the audacity of what was happening. Amanda wasn't just building her career on my stolen work. She was now being invited to lecture Marines about military innovations she'd never experienced and tactical concepts she'd never developed. The irony was so complete it felt deliberately orchestrated. What the organizers didn't know was that the gala coincided with my promotion ceremony. After months of administrative delays following the Amanda controversy, my promotion to captain had finally been approved. The ceremony was scheduled for 1800 hours, immediately before the evening's formal dinner and presentations. More importantly, what Amanda didn't know was that 300 Marines from across the West Coast would be attending the gala. Marines from Force Reconnaissance, Infantry, Special Operations, and Support Units. Marines who understood the difference between academic theory and battlefield innovation. Marines who could recognize tactical brilliance when they saw it, regardless of who was presenting it. I'd spent those 6 months carefully, quietly building relationships and documentation that the system couldn't suppress or silence, not through formal channels or official complaints, but through the informal networks that connect Marines who've served together, trained together, and trusted each other with their lives. Master Sergeant Price, my team leader from the Afghanistan mission, had kept detailed personal notes about the development and implementation of the rolling overwatch methodology. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from our reconnaissance team had maintained private communications logs showing my role in developing the tactical innovations. Lieutenant Thompson, who'd served as our intelligence liaison, had preserved operational briefings that documented my contributions to mission planning. These weren't classified documents that could be suppressed through legal channels. They were personal, professional records that Marines kept to track their own experiences and learning. The kind of documentation that existed outside official systems, but carried enormous weight among people who understood operational reality.
More importantly, I'd discovered that several other Force Reconnaissance Marines had encountered Amanda's research assistants, graduate students and policy researchers who'd approached them at military events, asking detailed questions about tactical innovations and operational methodologies under the guise of academic research. The pattern suggested that my case wasn't isolated. Amanda had been systematically harvesting military intellectual property from multiple sources to fuel her academic career. The night of the gala, I arrived at the Officers Club in my dress blue uniform with the new captain's bars I'd received that afternoon. The promotion ceremony had been small and private, just my commanding officer, a few colleagues, and the formal protocol required for advancement. No family attendance, no celebration, just the quiet recognition that came with earning the next level of responsibility in the Marine Corps. The club was packed with Marines in dress uniform, their ribbons and decorations telling stories of service in Iraq, Afghanistan, and operations that would never appear in history books. These were people who'd earned their positions through performance under fire, leadership in crisis, and dedication to something larger than personal advancement. Amanda was holding court near the front of the room, surrounded by military officers and defense contractors who were clearly impressed by her academic credentials and policy connections. She was wearing an elegant black dress and speaking with the confident authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room she entered. When she took the podium for her keynote address, the room quieted with the respect Marines automatically show to invited speakers, regardless of their personal opinions about the content. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amanda began, her voice carrying easily through the room's audio system, "I'm honored to address such a distinguished gathering of military professionals. Tonight, I want to share some insights from my research into advanced reconnaissance methodologies. Specifically, a tactical innovation I've termed adaptive overwatch methodology that represents a fundamental evolution in how we approach intelligence gathering in contested environments." I stood at the back of the room watching 300 Marines listen politely as Amanda described my tactical innovations as her intellectual achievement. She used sophisticated academic language to explain concepts that had been developed through trial and error in hostile territory, theoretical frameworks to describe adaptations that had emerged from life-or-death decision-making.
"The adaptive overwatch approach," she continued, clicking to a slide that showed tactical diagrams I recognized from my own mission planning, "represents a paradigm shift from static observation to dynamic intelligence gathering. By establishing coordinated movement patterns between multiple concealed positions, reconnaissance teams can achieve comprehensive intelligence coverage while maintaining tactical flexibility and reducing vulnerability to enemy detection." The presentation was flawless. Amanda had clearly studied not just my tactical concepts, but the broader context of reconnaissance operations, military doctrine, and strategic theory. She spoke with authority about operational challenges she'd never faced, tactical decisions she'd never made, and innovations she'd never developed. As her presentation reached its conclusion, Amanda opened the floor for questions. Hands went up around the room, Marines asking about implementation challenges, operational parameters, and practical considerations for adapting her research to real-world applications. "Dr. Richardson," called out a voice I recognized as Master Sergeant Williams from 2nd Force Reconnaissance, "your methodology sounds similar to innovations we've seen in recent operational environments. Have you coordinated with Marines who've actually implemented these techniques in the field?" Amanda's response was smooth and practiced. "My research has involved extensive consultation with military personnel at all levels. While I can't discuss specific operational details due to classification concerns, I can say that field experience has been invaluable in validating the theoretical framework." That was the moment I'd been waiting for. The intersection where Amanda's academic credentials met operational reality, where theoretical knowledge confronted actual experience. I raised my hand. "Dr. Richardson," I called out, my voice carrying clearly through the room, I'm curious about the development timeline for your adaptive overwatch methodology. When specifically did you first conceptualize this approach? Amanda's eyes found mine across the room, and I saw a flicker of recognition followed by what might have been concern, but she maintained her professional composure. The conceptual development began approximately 2 years ago as part of my doctoral research. The refinement process involved extensive analysis of existing reconnaissance doctrine and identification of tactical gaps that could be addressed through innovative methodologies. Interesting, I said, stepping forward slightly so more of the room could see me. Because the specific implementation of coordinated movement between multiple concealed positions, what you're calling adaptive overwatch, was successfully implemented in operational environments before your research was published. The room had gone completely quiet. 300 Marines were now focused on what appeared to be an academic discussion, but felt like something more significant. Amanda's professional smile remained in place, but her voice carried a slight edge. "Captain," she said, emphasizing my rank in a way that suggested she'd done her homework about who was challenging her, "I appreciate your interest in the academic development process, but I think you may be overestimating the uniqueness of tactical concepts that emerge from systematic analysis of operational challenges." "You're absolutely right, Dr. Richardson," I replied. "Systematic analysis is crucial for tactical development, which is why I'm curious about your research methodology. Specifically, how did your academic analysis produce implementation details that match classified operational planning documents?" The question hung in the air, like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Amanda's confident demeanor flickered for the first time, and I could see her calculating responses that might diffuse the situation without admitting anything problematic. But before she could respond, Master Sergeant Price stood up from his seat in the third row. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of a combat veteran addressing an academic, "the captain is asking about something specific. Those tactical innovations you just presented, they were developed and implemented by Captain Cavendish during operations in Afghanistan. I was the team leader for that mission." A murmur ran through the room as Marines began to understand what was happening. This wasn't academic debate. This was a Marine officer being publicly credited with work that had been stolen and presented as someone else's intellectual achievement. Amanda's composure cracked visibly. "I think there may be some confusion about—" "No confusion, ma'am," called out Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, standing up from his position near the bar. "I was on that team too. Captain Cavendish developed the rolling overwatch methodology, planned the implementation, and led the mission that proved its effectiveness." Now other Marines were standing, and I could see recognition spreading through the room. These weren't just random military personnel. Many of them had heard about the successful Afghanistan mission, had read the operational reports, or had worked with Marines who had been briefed on the tactical innovations that had emerged from that operation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amanda said, trying to regain control of the situation, "I think we may be conflating academic research with operational experience. Both are valuable, but—" "Dr. Richardson," I interrupted, my voice now carrying across the silent room with unmistakable authority. "My question is simple. Did your research involve unauthorized access to classified tactical information developed by Force Reconnaissance Marines?" The question was direct, unavoidable, and asked in front of 300 witnesses who understood exactly what was being alleged. Amanda could no longer deflect with academic jargon or claims about independent research. She had to admit to accessing classified information improperly or explain how her academic analysis had produced tactical concepts identical to classified operational innovations. As she stood at the podium, visibly struggling to formulate a response that might salvage her position, the entire room of Marines waited for an answer that everyone already knew she couldn't provide without admitting to intellectual theft. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was nowhere left
for her to hide.